Well, hello there. My name is Gabriel Hanna, and today's topic is Apache Cordova. A partner of mine composed together a lab to demonstrate the basic functionality of Cordova and how a potential web developer, could use it. But before I begin, I'd like to mention a couple tidbits of history and information on the framework before we actually begin the lab. So one thing that's worth noting out is that Cordova actually started out as PhoneGap that was originally developed by Nitobi Software, and in 2011, Adobe purchased Nitobi, and as a result, PhoneGap became an asset of Adobe as well. But so how Apache managed to get this is that Adobe sent Apache the code base because they wanted large companies to integrate their own services and support into it. So what ended up happening was that they had to rename PhoneGap to Cordova in the distribution they gave to Apache. So that's how it got its name. And next I'll be detailing the actual details of Cordova. So in the documentation pages, Apache gives a brief overview of the framework itself. It is an open source mobile development framework that uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make a cross-platform application. This can be used, and it can be compiled into an app that runs natively across multiple devices such as iOS, Android, Windows, most of the common operating systems that everyone uses on a daily basis. BlackBerry, probably? I think so, yeah. So the architecture of an app is basically illustrated in this diagram. So you have your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and all the resources you need for a regular web page. And what the application does is that Cordova wraps it up into a layer that can be run on a mobile OS. So there's this native wrapper going on for each compilation to a device OS. And your web app is essentially rendered in a web view and connected with plugins that provide support for each individual operating system. So this makes Cordova very popular in a sense because it takes existing frameworks and incorporates it into a much bigger scope. So that said, I'm going to discuss the lab and what the intentions in it are. So this is an opportunity to learn more about the Cordova framework and how a developer can use it to develop mobile applications. So the purpose is to demonstrate a fast, efficient workflow here. And by the end of this, hopefully you'll be able to explain what Cordova is, understand the structure of a Cordova app, learn how to develop in Cordova, and demonstrate basic skills with Visual Studio. You will need a Windows computer for this that has Visual Studio installed for it, and also the Apache Cordova tools that come with the application installer. You will also need the Visual Studio 2017 version because that's what I'm going to be using in this tutorial. Okay, step one. I have a small template to use, and it's a basic web app. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to this website. This GitHub repository contains all the code for a basic counter. A friend of mine and I worked on this, and it's a basic demonstration of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm going to download that. Okay, I've downloaded and unzipped the project. No, use Chrome. So here we have a very simple counter. You have a plus sign for incrementing the counter and a minus sign for decreasing it, and then you can also reset the counter. This isn't the most useful application, but it was just something that could be used quickly and replicated very, very easily. So once you have that downloaded, open up Visual Studio. Okay, now I'm inside Visual Studio 2017, and I'm gonna not open. I'm gonna create a new project. So what you want to do is go to JavaScript and mobile apps, in case you don't see it immediately, and select blank app, Apache Cordova. And I'm just going to give this a simple name, my Cordova app, and create it where you like. I'll just do it on the desktop because I can get back to it easily. And okay. Okay, so here's the basic splash screen of the project, and Visual Studio offers a few, Microsoft I should say, offers a few services to build your app, add services, and deploy it. So as you can see here, this is how an app is structured. So here is your web page, referring back to where is it? And referring back to this diagram here, the web app is where your www root is. This is where your website is going to be placed, and this is what is compiled when Cordova builds your website and your application for iOS, Android, or Windows. And this is the non-platform centered approach. So you can pretty much develop for most of the framework and most of the platforms without having to remake any of this. Alright, so when we built this project by default, it made a simple splash screen for us to see, and it's just a test to see how this would compile and if it meets if the system you're developing on meets the requirements for a particular platform. So it takes a couple minutes to compile to Android in this case. Okay, so I just decided to do a simulation mode instead of an emulation mode. This simulates what a device would actually look like in the browser, a device screen. Sorry, not the actual device. That's what the emulator does. But as you can see, this is just a basic splash screen to let you know that your device is ready for development for Android. Okay, so now that we know our system actually is ready for development, we don't need this basic starter file that was given to us. So we can actually get rid of the index.css and the index. Yes, I want to delete. So after getting rid of the files, your folder structure should look like this. And so now we're on to step 2. Step 3 now. Okay, so I got rid of the files. Now what we want to do is replace the code that was in the original project, the one that generated the splash screen, with the one that we want to use for the counter. So in a sense, we're going to redesign this counter and make it a mobile app instead of just a simple web app. Okay, so go back into Visual Studio, and we want to add some existing items in the desktop, in the clicker counter, and select the index.html, the script.js, and the style.css. Now, our application is structured originally so that all of these files are on the same layer. We don't want that for this project because the project gives us specific folders for specific items. So I'm just going to move these into their proper locations. Okay. And the next step is to modify this index.html file to comply with our structure. So we just have to make some minor modifications to the href tags and the source attributes inside the script and link tags. Okay, so we need to open up the index.html, add CSS / style.css, and then leave this tag. Actually, scripts. We want to include a reference to our original index.js because this is what Cordova provides, and if there was additional functionality that was needed for this application, we don't want to get rid of it. And then link it back to the one for our counter. So here everything's hooked up, and I need to run this in simulation mode to see if everything's okay now. And yes, everything is okay. The counter is working as normal, except it's a little bit tiny. And Visual Studio provides more options than just LG G5. The Nexus 10 is as big as you're gonna get, so I'll just launch to that. Okay, so we did get a much bigger image, thankfully, and it works just like the web page does, the web click counter. Okay, and additionally, this computer does have Google emulators installed for Android devices, so I'll just I'll also show how this emulates in a phone. Now this will take a while to set up, make sure everything's working okay, so I'll come back in a few minutes and we'll see how this turns out. Okay, this step here is very, very important. When you get to this, if you have Hyper-V installed as well as the Google emulator, you do not want to disable Hyper-V because it'll ask you to restart your computer, and this one particularly doesn't do so well with that. So I'll continue even though it's going to run very, very slowly. Okay, that took a ridiculously long time to build, but we finally have our final application. So the benefits to using an emulator over a simulator are that you actually have controls that manipulate this virtual device. So I can tilt it and it'll adjust. And I can also take a screenshot, zoom in, and use the controls that a normal Android device would. And of course I can use this application just like any other web page, or Android app for that matter. And it works. So now if we go back to home and tilt our device back around, if you do get lost and you're still in debug mode, you can easily find your app again. It has this little nifty Apache icon, and so that basically wraps up this tutorial. Here's our final app. I hope you've learned something today about Apache, how it can be used. If you're a web developer, this would be a great tool to use because it uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to whip up a pretty dandy mobile application in it took us less than 10 minutes to build this one. And then when you're done with this, you just stop the debugger and in Visual Studio, and your application will stop running too. So that concludes today's tutorial. Again, I hope you've learned something, and I also want to thank my friend Bruce Abshire, who helped me with this module. So kudos, and see you later.